Welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost. Today, we'll begin with the top 5 gifts of the week, as always, and a look at the stories shaping philanthropy, fundraising, and social impact around the country and around the world. Then, in our first segment, we'll dig into the GoFundMe controversy, how new moves in the crowdfunding space could potentially reshape charitable giving, with insights from Ben Mohler, ACFRE, Chief Executive and Principal Consultant at GivingThree. In our second segment, we'll turn to a global lens. When global funders pull back, the new risks for U.S. nonprofits. I'll be joined by Wayan Vota, Strategic Digital Transformation Leader, to explore how shifts in international philanthropy are creating real consequences here at home. Let's get started. Here are this week's top 5 gifts, once again in reverse order. Number 5, $40 million from the Rubin Foundation to the Courtauld Institute of Art, supporting the institution's mission to advance art history, conservation, and research at the highest levels. This investment strengthens the Courtauld's role as a global leader in preserving cultural heritage and expanding public engagement with the visual arts. Number 4 this week, $55 million from Francis Rooney, former U.S. Congressman and ambassador to the Holy See, and his wife, Kathleen, to endow the newly re-envisioned Rooney Democracy Institute at the University of Notre Dame. The gift will permanently support the Institute's annual conference, its Health of Democracy survey, and the university's broader democracy initiative, which funds public programming, postdoctoral scholars, and a Democracy Fellows program preparing the next generation of public servants. Number 3, $80 million from an anonymous alumnus to DePauw University Athletics. The gift will transform athletic facilities, elevate the student-athlete experience, and enhance competitive excellence, reshaping the future of DePauw athletics for decades to come. Coming in at number 2 this week, $100 million from Mark and Lynn Benioff to USCF Benioff Children's Hospitals, expanding world-class pediatric care. The gift will support construction of a new state-of-the-art hospital and major renovations in Oakland, increasing access for children and families across the Bay Area. Their generosity is improving the region's pediatric health system and expanding life-changing care for thousands of children each year. And number 1 this week, $150 million from alumnus Matthew Walsh and his wife Joyce to the newly renamed Walsh School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame. The award will expand the school's global reach, research capacity, and long-term vision, broadening its impact on the teaching and practice of architecture worldwide and ensuring it can meet the evolving needs of the field. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? I'm certain that we have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. This week's philanthropic headlines reflect large-scale commitments, shifting giving models, and evolving business social dynamics. There's a lot of it. Let's start with a few of the shorter stories of the week. In Houston, Nancy and Rich Kinder announced a commitment of more than $10 billion, representing roughly 95% of their wealth, to Houston area causes. According to Philanthropy News Digest, the pledge will direct funds through the Kinder Foundation toward city parks, arts, education, and community institutions. Coverage by the Houston Chronicle adds that the couple's giving builds on legacy investments, such as an $18.5 million expansion of Emancipation Park in Houston's 3rd Ward. At the national level, Mackenzie Scott has awarded 2 large grants totaling more than $100 million, one to the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund and another to Morgan State University. The gift to Morgan State was reported by the Washington Post at $63 million and was described as the largest single private gift in that university's history, supporting endowment growth, vulnerable students, and new research centers. Scott's giving model emphasizes large unrestricted gifts, or trust-based philanthropy, and Philanthropy News Digest notes that she is urging, quote, communal action in philanthropy. In the corporate social sphere, a recent report from chief executives for corporate purpose, or CECP, finds that companies aligning business strategy with social purpose perform notably better, reporting that about 25% higher revenue and 22% higher pre-tax profits are attributable to companies that embed purpose in their grant making. Philanthropy News Digest has reported this extensively just this week. For nonprofits and funders, the implication is clear. Mission-driven enterprises may be key partners in the evolving landscape of social impact. Meanwhile, online giving is making headlines. Conservationist and live stream creator Maya Higa has launched the Alveus Research and Recovery Institute, a new wildlife rescue, rehabilitation, and research initiative. And within 2 days, her campaign has 7,992 donors and more than $799,000 raised towards a $1 million goal. The speed and scale of this digital native campaign highlights a new frontier in philanthropy, influencer-led giving built on community and social media momentum. To learn more about this program or to contribute, go to alveussanctuary.org/institute. A developing story in the fundraising world is raising new concerns about transparency in third-party giving platforms. GoFundMe has automatically generated more than 1.4 million fundraising pages for U.S. nonprofits by scraping IRS data, creating donation pages that appear official, even though many organizations were unaware that pages existed. Some of the listings include incorrect or outdated information, and each transaction carries a default tip of up to 14.5%. Nonprofit leaders are now assessing the implications for donor clarity, brand control, and ethical fundraising standards. To explore what this might mean for the sector and how organizations might respond, I spoke with Ben Mohler, CFRE, ACFRE, Chief Executive and Principal Consultant at GivingThree. Here is our conversation. Ben, thank you very much for being willing to talk today. I appreciate having a chance to chat with you about some posts that you've had on some recent developments in the world of giving, and specifically with GoFundMe. For those who haven't read your posts or heard about this issue, can you introduce us to the topic and why you chose to write about it?
Yeah, so I was going about my week last week and I saw a news report from a local news station, one of those investigative journalism things. I think it was out of San Diego, News on Your Side 7. Shout out to whoever did that awesome piece. And the first thing that came to mind was my clients. I'm a consultant representing nonprofit clients, and so I looked into it and I wanted to see if any of them were affected. If the claims are true, and I found that they were, that my clients, nonprofits that I work with, were in fact had their information scraped and put on the website by GoFundMe, and so I kind of stepped into action. So, and I'll talk about the post here in a bit, but I wanted to make it clear. So I'm on the board of AFP Global. So I'm not speaking in official capacity representing AFP Global. I'm also on the Journal Advisory Council for AHP, so make sure that I'm not, I'm clear that I'm not speaking for AHP. I'm also involved with APRA on the Conference Planning Committee for APRA. And I'm also a member of some other organizations. Teach with the fundraising school at IU, the Lilly School of Philanthropy. So I'm not speaking on any of those capacities. This is just me as a professional looking at the news reports, reading them at face value. And I'm just walking through the assessment I made in the moment based on the facts I can find. So, this is a fast moving issue, and, we're having this conversation in the morning, and by the time you edit it and post it this afternoon, and even tomorrow, next week, the story is going to shift and change. New facts will come to light. So I want to make those caveats that this is based on what I know, and I'm just kind of walking through my experience. So
Sure.
So yeah, I saw the story and I did some digging, and I found that most of the organizations that I work with were in fact affected. And I reached out to them and I asked if they had authorized this, and they had not. And looking at the information, the process to claim your page, as it states, is similar to when I was the executive director of a foundation. If you wanted to open a bank account or a brokerage account or to authorize transactions, the things you had to do, that I had to do as an executive, were pretty consistent. And the things I'm reading about the process to claim a page, it looks like it's the same process, that you have to essentially open a bank account to claim your page and accept the terms of the account holder. And digging into the terms that are on the fact page and that are listed not on news articles but on the page of GoFundMe, pretty clear about the impact and the consequences, and if an organization claimed a page or if they didn't, and what happened to those funds. And so I started taking all the research, and I didn't see a lot of other folks weighing in on the issues. So I thought, rather than to be a quote unquote thought leader, best to just kind of dig into the nuts and bolts of the facts behind this issue, and just document everything that I found, and hopefully help others find a way to understand the ethics of our profession. Because I think this is a great opportunity for us to learn and grow. I think it's a watershed moment for sure.
Well, before you dig into the kind of the bullet points of what you've just been sharing, you use the word scraped, and there's almost an implication in that word. It's being used by others, not just yourself, that somehow this was taken. But this information is public, correct? I mean,
Correct.
all
Yes.
the, yes.
Yeah.
So, and I believe it's on 1.3 or 1.4 million not-for-profit 501c3 organizations. So I cannot speak for GoFundMe. We hope to be having a response from them shortly. But my understanding is that in a purely logical way, that they might claim that the purpose in establishing these pages would be to allow not-for-profits to have access to the hundreds of thousands or millions of people who make donations to causes, many of them personal, but some of them not-for-profit 501c3 causes, through their platform. So before you dive into the particulars, fundamentally, what's wrong with the idea of setting up a page and making it possible to give to an organization?
There's nothing wrong with setting up a page and making it possible for organizations to accept donations, or for individuals to direct gifts to organizations. The details come down to the method by which that's done. And so one is the issue of consent. So these organizations that I'm familiar with, that I've worked with, have indicated they have not given consent, that this information was taken and posted and has all appearances of being credible because it's on a website. In this day and age, if it's on a website, people are likely to believe it, whether it's true or not. So that's one issue, is that it basically steals the credibility of a nonprofit that, even like this SEO capital, like nonprofits work so hard to protect their brand, to protect their values. And so there's this loss of control over that brand, over those values, because if someone goes in and types, I want to go fund, and they type in the name of their favorite nonprofit, they're likely going to find this giving page, which, like I said, is not, in my experience, is not the like at the consent of a nonprofit. So that's one thing, the issue of consent. There's, I believe there's trademark, copyright, a number of legal issues, but I want to talk about the ethical issues. One of the things that really dictates the profession, kind of how I do my work and my experience in the sector, has been the currency of trust. So when a donor is giving funds to a nonprofit, they're essentially saying, I'm trusting you to use these funds to exercise my values, whether it be to fund a homeless shelter, to provide food for the folks that don't have those resources, to help with education. They're when they give those funds, they are saying, I trust you to use these funds in a responsible way. And so there's a lot of professionals that there's not a lot of legal protections. So there is their organizations, professional associations, like Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, and a number of others, CASE, Council for Advanced and Supportive Education. And they have a professional code of ethics, which outlines the various different structures and frameworks by which we evaluate our the ways that we guard that trust. And in a lot of those codes, it talks about compensation, and it really speaks to what is motivating the behavior. And so folks that work for a nonprofit, professional fundraisers, agree when they become an AFP member or when they work for an organization that prescribes to these standards to uphold these tenets, these principles of ethical fundraising, and one of which is that their motivation should be to advance the mission, to advance the values of the donors, to support the greater good. And when their motivation verges over into being motivated by money, accepting performance-based incentives, that moves the motivation from protecting that trust, effectively becoming a fiduciary to represent the interest of a donor, to becoming self-motivated to the interest of self, or in this case, my belief is the interest of shareholders. So while there's nothing wrong with having a page that would allow donors to make a gift and funds to go to the nonprofit, the tip structure and the element of having to claim the page, and if you don't claim the page, then it's likely, from what I'm reading, for those funds to revert back to that the owner or the holder of those funds. In this case, I think it's the GoFundMe organization, to effectively have discretion over how those funds are used.
So the funds may not, in fact, go to the charity at all. Is that what you're understanding?
Correct.
Well, let me also ask you, Ben, about this idea about the ethics that apply to those in the profession. First of all, for those unfamiliar with this, do those apply to the institutions or to the individuals? So individual fundraisers who belong to AFP, and I do as well, we know it does apply to us. Does it apply to the institutions in our space, both the 501c3s, but also the vendors who serve our sector?
The answer to that is it depends. So, and I think this is where we're going to start to see some news in the next few days or weeks, because I think this issue is going to really come to the fore. And there are, I'll speak for my experience with AFP, not for AFP, but for my experience with AFP. Every year when I re-up my membership, when I pay my dues, I have to sign a commitment to uphold the ethical code of fundraising. And if I have those dues paid for by organization, let's say I'm an organizational member, so basically, and I actually had this case where I was the vice president for advancement for Kentucky's Community and Technical College System. So it's a statewide higher education, the largest higher education provider in the state. And one thing that we did when I first joined there was I became an organizational member of AFP, by which I prescribed to the code of ethics on behalf of the organization, institution, and every single staff member that is facing the public signed the code. All of our principal fundraisers signed the code. Our presidents all signed the code. And actually, we did that back in September of 2019, right before AFP announced Ethics Month. It was really a kind of a cool moment. In that case, the individuals were signing the code, but because we were taking an institutional position, the organization was prescribing to the code. And talking about corporate sponsors or supporters, by supporting AFP, they are effectively agreeing to the same code. So, and that's where I think we're going to start to see some more conversations is, are they held to the same standard, and what is the recourse when they do or don't reflect that in their behaviors?
Now, you've gone through a number of the bullet points in your post, and we'll make sure that people know where to find that. But some of those are not just the legal and ethical implications. And as you pointed out, this is Ethics Month for AFP, so it's a good
Yeah.
time to be having this conversation. But I'm wondering if you're hearing alternative viewpoints on this, either from GoFundMe directly, from other vendors, from organizations in the sector that may not have the resources to have a way into the marketplace which GoFundMe has established. Are you hearing other people say, "Well, wait, we need to take a second look at this. Maybe there's a way to make this new platform work for us"?
Yeah, there's a quote by I think it's Marcus Aurelius about the ends justifying the means and half measures. I'm not gonna we can probably find the quote and use it, but in this case I don't think that applies. I don't know that the ends justify the means. I think that the motivation was to democratize philanthropy, that there would be a way to do that, to bring the power and the voice of a corporation to bear to advance philanthropy in a way that doesn't not involve tips or obscuring the use or management of funds. And I'll give you an example. So when I talked about the community college system, when I worked there, um, one of the things that we had access to was we were able to invest our endowment in funds or investment vehicles that were way beyond what we would typically be able to invest in because of the size of our endowment. We were able to invest at or beyond what some of the Ivy Leagues were investing, a community college system for the state of Kentucky. We were consistently top quartile, top decile in performance compared to peers. We were performing at or above the Ivies. And it wasn't because we were really good at making investment decisions, it was because the scale of our resources, we were able to partner basically all the retirement funds for the state of Kentucky and our endowment for the foundation. We're able to get us access to vehicles, investment vehicles that were way beyond what we would have if we had done it individually. And we see this played out in the marketplace. You think about insurers and how, a small business owner like myself and the difficulty I have to find insurance at a low and competitive rate because I'm in a pool of one. Whereas if you're in a large organization that has a lot of healthy people, you're going to have access to a much better insurance policy, premium policies. I think if an organization, financial institution, had a real deep interest in helping to move the needle to democratize fundraising and philanthropy, that we would see there be this consortium of how do we basically bring down the processing fees? How do we use our influence to drive down the cost that it takes for a nonprofit to do business? And I think there are ways to do that. That is not what I'm seeing from the marketplace. I'm not seeing, hey, let's find a way to pull together or to create this environment that allows nonprofits to invest and have less capital lost in the process of transferring from people that want to impact through generosity versus those that are profiting from those transactions. So I think that would be one way I would respond to that. I don't think that those claims are valid. I think they sound nice, but they're not valid.
And I do want to point out for those who have not visited GoFundMe at all for any purpose, that tip system you're describing, it is set up so that individuals can reduce or eliminate the tip, I believe. But the problem remains, I guess, that you're pointing out, which is that first of all, there's a fee, of course, for a transaction if people in fact have claimed the page, and then on top of that, the tip is already built in, so one would have to be familiar with that and then adjust it downward to zero if they did not wish to provide a tip to GoFundMe. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
So what would you, it seems like now you're talking a bit about what the possibilities are. What would you like to see not only GoFundMe do, but the rest of the sector do in response to maybe a growing awareness about all the issues you're highlighting?
I think the best course of action for GoFundMe, honestly, is to issue an apology, retract their process, their initiative, and to be really clear about how they look to honor and uphold ethical fundraising. and to demonstrate that not just in words but in actions. I think that would be what I love to see. I don't know that's going to happen, but that's my wish. In a perfect world, that's my wish.
And more broadly, beyond GoFundMe, are there implications for others who are working with the sector?
Um, I think there are. I think so there are other organizations that are sponsors of these associations. I'm really excited and encouraged because some of the traffic I've seen on my posts have been from CEOs or CFOs or CIOs of some of GoFundMe's competitors. And they have either liked or commented or reposted to their network. So, I mean, just by kind of rallying around just the general information that I've put out there, it's great to see that, at least in words and actions, that in principle they support the ethical tenets of fundraising. So I'm encouraged what that means for others. I think there's going to be a wait and see for some organizations. Like, what is the penalty? What happens if you go past this line that we've established among fundraisers? And is that a line we're willing to cross? Are we willing to pay that penalty? So I did some back of envelope math on you know a scale of if GoFundMe launches this and not just limited to 1.4 million, but more broadly to all nonprofits. And I did some minimum calculations based on zero tip and basically processing fees, and then an average give size using kind of just basic math. It's staggering. There is a clear profit motive by doing this, even if people don't choose the tip. So I think that the action by the sector needs to be clear and convincing, and I'm hopeful that it is.
Well, we'll look forward, of course, to GoFundMe's response to all this, as well as how the rest of the sector discusses it. And Ben, thank you for all of this. And if people want to read your piece, which is titled "GoFundMe and Protecting the Nonprofit Sector," where can they find that, and where can they find more on on this topic from you and from others?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty easy. I mean the place I post mostly is LinkedIn. It's a professional network, not a lot of politicking or sales going on there for me. And just go to my profile, and the post that I think you're referencing is one that I used green match heads, matchsticks with green match heads. Just I wanted it to be kindling for discussion for folks to be able to kind of light a fire under the sails and kind of dig deeper into this issue and kind of find where things might start to ignite. And there, I think I have two posts there, but that's probably just the best places on LinkedIn. And my name is Ben Mohler, so I think my LinkedIn name is just Ben Mohler, Mohler. So
Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate it.
yeah, no problem.
Our thanks again to Ben for sharing about this issue and for bringing not only the issue to light, but also detailing it so much in his post. We would encourage you to take a look at it there. Just before we went live, we did receive the following statement in response to questions that we submitted to GoFundMe. I will read the statement in full. It has a little bit of heft to it, but I do want to make sure that you benefit from at least hearing their perspective, although they did not benefit from hearing Ben's words before writing this. Here they are nonetheless. For many years, people have been able to fundraise for and give to nonprofits directly on GoFundMe. Last year alone, more than 70,000 nonprofits received support through GoFundMe. This year, with the rollout of nonprofit pages, we improved the experience for our users looking to support nonprofits on GoFundMe, making it easier to discover and support the causes and organizations they care about, while improving discoverability for more than 1.4 million nonprofits so they can connect with new donors and donor data as desired. We've heard from many of our nonprofit partners that getting donor funding and donor acquisition has become increasingly challenging. At the same time, more than 100 million people come to GoFundMe every month looking to help, and 2 donations are made every second on our platform. We launched nonprofit pages earlier this year, leveraging publicly available data from the IRS and trusted third-party sources to help nonprofits connect with the donors and supporters organically coming to the GoFundMe platform who are looking for ways to help. Since launch, nonprofits have had the ability to claim their page for free so that they can get access to the donor data and also so they can control the branding of their page. Nonprofits may also request that the page be taken down, and GoFundMe promptly honors all removal requests. Regardless of whether or not a nonprofit claims their page, donations made through GoFundMe's nonprofit pages go directly to the nonprofit organizations through PayPal Giving Fund or through one of our payment processors at no charge to the nonprofit organization. They do not go through GoFundMe.org. We've been sharing information about nonprofit pages across social channels, op-eds, email, webinars, and at nonprofit conferences since earlier this year, but we need to continue doing more to communicate how and why we were doing this. Because we don't yet have contact information for every nonprofit, until a page is claimed, our outreach channels are limited, and we're working hard to address that. Additionally, GoFundMe doesn't charge a fee to start or manage a fundraiser. The only fee on the GoFundMe consumer platform is a standard transaction fee of 2.2% plus 30 cents per donation to a nonprofit fundraiser, which helps us pay our payment processors and safely deliver funds. GoFundMe's pricing model gives our donors the choice to leave an optional tip, which helps power the platform. These completely voluntary contributions make it possible for us to provide trusted fundraising tools, customer support, and a dedicated global trust and safety team that protects our community. The majority of donors adjust our tipping slider and in many cases do move it to zero. Nonprofits can claim their page by clicking the Claim My Nonprofit Page link on the nonprofit page and following the prompts to verify their organization. Once they have claimed their page, they will have the ability to edit their page to best reflect their brand and mission. After a nonprofit claims and confirms their organization through GoFundMe, they will gain access to certain data about their donors and fundraisers for fundraising and compliance purposes. The data includes contact information like name and email address, date, time, and amount of donation, where the donation came from, whether it's from a fundraiser created for the nonprofit or from their nonprofit page, and a list of all fundraisers created for the nonprofit. Organizations can also request their nonprofit page be taken down via our help center, which is located at support.gofundme.com. Our team promptly responds to all requests. The rest is largely legal matters, and I will make sure that this is available to anyone who requests it. You can reach out to me at j@DonorSearch.net. Again, I was reading from the statement supplied by GoFundMe. We'll make sure we return to the issue as this develops, especially during this month of focus on ethics at AFP. Now, we turn from platform ethics at home to a fast-shifting landscape abroad, one with major implications for U.S. nonprofits working on global issues. A $6.6 billion foundation, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, has announced it will halt all funding to U.S.-based organizations. The decision wasn't about program performance, but about regulatory uncertainty. CIF has said that it is no longer confident in its ability to navigate the U.S. policy environment for foreign funders and has begun redirecting support to non-U.S. partners instead. Their exit comes amid a broader global contraction in cross-border funding and a growing hesitancy among international donors. The question for U.S. nonprofits is whether this is an isolated move or an early signal that more foundations might follow. To help us make more sense of this moment, I spoke with Wayan Vota, a strategic digital transformation leader and expert on international development and responsible technology. He spent more than 2 decades working across 20 countries, helping organizations adapt to rapidly shifting global conditions. Here is our conversation. Thank you very much for being willing to talk today. I've been following your posts with great interest, and I know it would be great for people to have a sense about not only what you're talking about in terms of aid flows and how it affects the nonprofit sector, the NGO sector specifically, but also how you came to this information, how you came to be interested in this subject. Can you tell people a bit about your background?
So many moons ago now, I started in the international development field. So I started looking at how do we use the tools of technology to improve people's lives around the world. And my specific role is thinking through how can we think about the problems people are facing in developing countries? How can we think about solutions that could solve those problems? and who could fund our work in solving those problems for people in developing countries. So I've been in the nexus of problems and issues in developing countries, in the technology space, and in the funding realm of understanding where these three come together. So my focus has been for years now really in digital development and the funding flows around it. Then in January of 2025, I, and along with about 20,000 other people, were unemployed from the defunding of US aid. And so I had time on my hands to study a lot deeper where these aid flows are going, are not going. And now I actually publish every day. I try to publish something interesting on LinkedIn that is related to this concept of where money is or isn't flowing. And then also taking a bent of how can we use AI, generative AI, to understand these flows and hopefully direct some of them to issues and concerns that we feel are important.
And in one of these recent posts, and as you say, you're posting daily, so we'll make sure that people know where to look for that information later. But in one of your recent posts, you talked about CIF, or the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. And for those unfamiliar with it, it would be good to know something about that. But if you could also explain why you focused on that, what you learned, and then why you think it matters.
So CIF is interesting. It is a UK-based company, foundation. It has 6.6 billion under management, so it's a rather large international organization. And they've funded a fair amount of climate action and activity in the US. They've also funded other activity around the world. The climate activity in the US recently was part of I would say, a hit piece, a real strange confluence of conservative actors who felt that CIF was actually funding radical left-wing green energy issues. Now, I, as someone who does believe in climate change, does believe that we as humans are heating the earth and that we should change our ways, feel that yes, we should be funding green energy. We should be funding ways that help us understand our impact on the planet. Sadly, that's not a completely agreed upon stance within the domestic US policy arena. So there were people that said that CIF was funding a liberal agenda to promote the concept of climate change. So as a result, CIF has stopped funding all US-based entities. In other words, they are trying not to have any funding in the US. They'll fund organizations outside the US, but not US registered NGOs, which is a huge hit to anybody who cares about climate change in the US. Very frustrating, very disappointing, and also makes you wonder if they're the first to pull out because we now have policy by tweet, which is even crazier than just policy by executive order, which was crazy enough to begin with. That what do you do? What do you do when your operating environment becomes so unknown, so variable that you could wake up in the morning and a random tweet sends your entire project into the red zone, defunded or otherwise destroyed? So in that sense, their response is logical, but it's also extremely, extremely frustrating and disappointing. They published this announcement on their website that they were no longer going to fund US entities. And then I went digging to figure out why and what that impact would be. And that was really the LinkedIn blog post is, here's the objective thing that happened. They're not funding US NGOs anymore. Here's the backstory, how that came about. And here's the impact that we and US NGO world are going to feel because of that.
So let me ask you about that impact. You just said that it's about 6.6 billion. Is that dollars or pounds?
$6.6 billion is their endowment.
And
so they give out about 500 million in US grants. Well, the understanding was, the number I found was 553 million in US grants since 2014.
Okay.
So that's not 553 million a year,
right.
But in total since 2014, that's still a pretty chunk of change.
It sounds like it's very significant in terms of grant makers, especially international grant makers, giving to US based entities that are addressing some of these issues. Um, and when you look at this more broadly, what is it that it might be is signaling in terms of how other grant makers, especially international grant makers, of course, might be adjusting their grant making, especially with reference to the U.S.
Yeah, it was very concerning because this is a well-capitalized international organization. If they have 6.6 billion under management, it is not as if they are a small NGO or a small foundation, or in theory, they could take lawsuits as far as needed to try to counter any attack on their work. And that they essentially at the first shot across the bow, if you will, decided to stop and walk away. To me, that sends a very chilling signal across the entire donor space. Um, are they the first? I hope that they are the only versus the first, but this is a challenge for an international organization with that much heft to walk away from the U.S. as a country to fund. That's scary. There's been some interplay and some people saying, great, this is wonderful. More money will flow to countries in need versus organizations in the US, which I think is a little challenging because there are many organizations who work either partially or fully in developing countries that are registered in the US specifically to be able to access US foundations and US donations. And there are many even startup companies that are based in Kenya or Asia who have no presence whatsoever in the US and are registered in Delaware specifically to have the US as a seal of approval that they can manage to a US level experience. And so taking that away, saying you're not going to fund a US based entity, regardless of where they work, that's a little scary.
I hadn't thought about this until you helped kind of describe a visual diagram of those money flows. But I imagine that there are small NGOs, grassroots organizations operating all around the world that are being regranted dollars from large US based or headquartered NGOs. And if they are unable, if those US NGOs are unable to access that funding, then those small grassroots NGOs that aren't in a position to make a large grant request or support the reporting that would be required on such a request, they would also potentially be losing access to that revenue for work they might be doing domestically somewhere that has nothing to do with any of these issues.
I think there's a great example of this very concept. When USAID was defunded, so the United States Agency for International Development was defunded in January of 2025. I lost my job. A lot of other people lost their jobs. About 20,000 people in the US. However, over 230,000 people around the world also lost their jobs because the vast majority of money was actually just coming through the US because of legal requirements and then immediately going overseas and supporting small organizations overseas. All of that ended. So that CIF may stop funding US-based organizations, it actually could be cutting off many organizations who are maybe 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, who have registered in the US, but may not have even any staff here or maybe one staff here. And all the rest of their staff are in these countries. And so now the choice is, do they make sure they're registered in their own country? Some are not. And there are also different laws on can they take funding from an international source or not. The US was one of the few countries where you could be in the US as a legal entity, have all your staff overseas, and have the money flow through and be seen as both a US entity. So you have all the 990, IRS 990s and the accounting and the processes that donors want to see and doing the work in the field. This cuts all that off. And so now, in theory, they are only going to be funding organizations that are based in those countries wholly, which some are not. And now we're going to see a wide variety of accounting capacity to handle these kind of donor flows.
This may be a hard question to answer, but I know that many of the folks who were AID then, of course, went out to try to apply their skills in lots of different ways. And some of those ways were to work for private contracting agencies, so not in the nonprofit or NGO or third sector, but rather with entities that are doing some version of development work all around the world, that might have been accessing ODA or official development assistance prior. And now with that talent pool, perhaps some of those people were able to find employment or work on contracts or projects through those for-profit entities. I'm wondering if what you've seen here could have ramifications there as well.
So CIF, from my understanding, mainly funds nonprofits or NGOs or whatever that terminology is in that country. So I'm not too worried about that aspect. I think a bigger problem happened when USAID was defunded. USAID had contracts, grants, cooperative agreements, and it had grants always went to NGOs or almost always went to NGOs, but cooperative agreements went to mostly NGOs and some private companies, and contracts almost always went to private companies. So in that concept of USAID's defunding, we saw a lot of people. So of the 20,000 in the US, maybe 10,000 were in private sector companies that no longer can work with USAID because it doesn't exist anymore. I'll give you a great example. Tetra Tech is a very large multinational for-profit company listed on the stock exchange. They had a very large USAID work going on, multiple contracts. So they were above board doing everything the USAID asked, making sure that the vast majority of their work was actually happening in developing countries. Well, they have stopped their entire USAID portfolio. USAID doesn't exist. And they have a small state portfolio and maybe some MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation. But otherwise, the people that used to work for them are now unemployed or looking for different jobs or have other jobs. So it's not like CIF funding US nonprofits is going to have as large an effect as USAID defunding. That was the big boom. CIF is a grenade in comparison. Still painful, still will cause deaths around the world.
And as you said, I guess it remains to be seen about whether or not this is the first of many, or maybe the first and last, and as you hope. But there is another trend that you looked at in a post just today, I think, which is how governments around the world are also refashioning how much they're giving to other forms of assistance, whether they're grants or even loans, I suppose, but any kind of official development assistance, much of which, of course, was benefiting nonprofits or NGOs in their work and development around the world. Can you talk about that a little and what you found so far and what trends you see emerging?
Sure. So I looked at the top 10 bilateral assistance governments. So these are governments that form a direct relationship with a country versus governments that support World Bank or the UN or other multilateral organizations. So the top 10: US, Germany, Japan, France, United Kingdom, Sweden, Holland, Norway, Canada, Australia, in that order. And the US in 2023 to 24 went down 7%. We don't have the final number for 2025, but it's definitely more than 20%. Most I've seen is something around 80 to 90% drop in US foreign assistance. Germany dropped 8% between 23-24 and has continued dropping. Japan, 13% drop, France, 9% drop. The United Kingdom and Sweden both were about 15% reduction in 23 to 24. Many of these countries are taking the US government's lead and reducing even greater amounts in fiscal 25, using the US government's destruction of USAID as an excuse or an opportunity for them to reduce their own domestic bilateral activities. So overall, we're seeing cuts across the board. All the top 10 decreased their funding between 23 and 24, between a few percent all the way up to 15%. And we don't have the numbers for 25 yet. Everything points to an even greater reduction in 2025.
I seem to remember something about the US before all these changes, before the beginning of the year, being somewhere in the neighborhood of 42 or 43% of development assistance around the world. I'm not sure if that's an inflation.
45% of
45%.
total, yes, was the US. And in fact, the US was larger than the next 4 countries combined.
So the losses, when we speak in percentage terms, sometimes we kind of lose the perception about how many dollars we're talking about, but also how many lives are impacted. You talked for a moment ago about, of course, staffing and how that impacts people on the nonprofit side, but also in the for-profit side, who are reliant on this revenue flow. Do you have a sense about the scale of what this means in terms of dollars overall globally, but maybe what it really means at the individual level when we're talking about countries and communities that were benefiting from this assistance? That it's one thing for an organization to receive the money. It's another thing for the community that then is the beneficiary of the services provided by that organization. Can you give us a picture about the scale and that large and small?
Sure. So back in, let's take 2024, because it's the last fiscal year we have a good number for. It was approaching or just over $60 billion was total US foreign assistance. Now, if we want to put that in scale, that is less than 1% of the US federal budget. In fact, it's less than 1/10 of 1% of the US federal budget. So in terms of the US federal budget, it is lint in the dryer at best. It is a loose change in the couch. It is ridiculous in the tiny amount of funding it was for the overall government. The best estimates we have is that the destruction of US aid is going to cause something like 14 million lives to be lost. 14 million people over what essentially was budget dust in the US government's scheme of things. So it's very disappointing that we're going to have such a great impact. And that's lives lost, not lives hurt or lives reduced, but lives outright lost. A great example is the concept of HIV drugs. So we now have the ability, if someone is HIV positive, to put them on a drug regimen so they become what's called undetectable. So they don't have a detectable amount of HIV virus, which makes them where they are not able to pass the HIV virus on. So essentially you're able to stop the HIV from spreading. If you take the drugs away, HIV comes roaring back. They have 6 to 12 to 18 months before they could be completely incapacitated by the HIV virus. So in that sense, it is a real issue and problem for many countries, this cutting off of aid. And, it's really sad, frustrating that our government has decided to turn its back on so many millions of people.
It sounds like also that the individual countries, at least the top 10 that you mentioned, have not redirected funds into these areas as yet. Is that just because of inability or change in priorities? And I don't just mean the top 10, but all around the world where countries are directly impacted, for example, by the prevalence of HIV.
So it is nice to see some countries are shifting. So they are shifting to try to take up the slack or, fill in some of the issues and areas in which the US has stepped back from. The real challenge is scale. I mean, the US was 40% of total aid flows, 45%, sorry. If you take 45% of impact off the table, a country the size of Australia, which has, the US has 65 billion and Australia has 4 billion. Australia could double its amount and it's still a rounding error compared to what the US government was doing, right? So in that sense, that is the difference in scale. So it doesn't really matter if Australia increases its aid flows by 20%. That's a rounding error compared to what was taken off the table.
Now, I know that you've been following this not only because of the change in the work that you do, but also because you follow digital. And that's your thing. It's something that you've been using very closely in order to follow these patterns and then share what you're seeing. Are you seeing beyond the money flows, are you also seeing some creative and positive uses of digital in whatever context? Program implementation, ways of making arguments, advocacy for governments to provide funding in different areas, 100 different ways. Have you seen digital being a toolkit for change to some of the negative effects that we've seen as a result of these budgetary changes?
So one thing I'm really excited about, a lot of the bilaterals and a decent number of multilaterals, and now more and more foundations are moving towards a proposal process that is rather transparent and rather understood and fixed. Like you can build a process around their call for proposals. So you can start, if something has a process flow, a documented process flow, you can use generative AI tools to give you decent answers and understanding of each of those flows. So what I have seen, and I'm very excited about, if you have a formulatic proposal process and you are a small NGO in the US or anywhere around the world, you can now start to use generative AI to help you write the draft of your proposal. In fact, I've actually gone through and found multiple different RFPs, requests for proposals, from foundations, from State Department in the US, and from FCDO, which is the equivalent of USAID in the UK, which still exists, and other organizations, and taken their requirement and used different AI tools to write a really good first draft. Now, I want to be really clear. This is a first draft. This is what you would expect to get from an over-year graduate assistant who you said, hey, go write an proposal to match this RFP. And where an over-year graduate assistant might take a week or two and you might have to review it 4 or 5 times just to keep them on focus, AI will do it in 20 minutes and you'll have 3 iterations, and then the final version is still draft. You still have to go through and use as your own mind and understand and check and edit, but it takes away what would have been a 1 week, 1 month process and took it down to a few hours of prompting and then editing. I've personally been able to submit proposals, winning proposals that were for me, took me hours to do instead of days, which huge time saving. And I'm seeing this as a great democratizer of development effort. If I have no giant advantage over somebody in India or somebody in a Pacific Island country, being able to sit down with one of these AI tools and really work through what the process is and come up with a very strong proposal. Now, I have 25 years of writing proposals, so I might be a little bit better at what I think is a great product than someone who's only spent 5 years at it. But that would be the difference if I had 25 years and they had 5 years and we didn't have AI tools. The big difference is we'll both get to the same draft in 20 minutes, an hour, that previously would have taken me a week and maybe taken them a month.
I often ask people at a point like this, where there's light at the end of the tunnel, whatever that tunnel is and whatever its distance. So if you were talking to especially nonprofits and NGOs around the US right now, what would you say is the one thing that they could do that would put them in a better position, not just to get the money, but to do the work that they want to do?
And here I would have to say, explore what AI can do for you, what generative AI can do for you. I am not usually a technology cheerleader. I'm usually the person that I'm a technologist, so I'm usually the last person that agrees that yes, technology could solve the problem. My view is, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates did a really, really good job at informing our entire mental construct with barely using the written word. I mean, most of the time it was oral arguments, right? And one of them even had a whole treatise. I want to say Plato had a treatise saying the written word is a crutch for the human mind, right? If you really are good with the human mind, you don't even need to write it down. You should be able to remember it. But of course, his disciple wrote it down, which is the only reason we can read about it now, 2000 plus years later. So I am not a big hype fan, but wow, I am really impressed by how much and how far we can get with AI. Proposal development is just a easy kind of like low-hanging fruit. thinking through, I've taken it and said, here are some of the data that we get from our constituents. Make sense of this data. I'm going to look at it a certain way and I'm going to be thinking about it a certain way. But here, AI, look at it in ways that I might even not imagine. And it comes back in new views and 10 new views. I only care about 5 of them. The other 5 are interesting, but don't matter to me. But the concept, it took me 20 minutes versus 20 hours to come up with 5 new ways to look at data. That to me is very powerful. So proposal writing, understanding the product you're working on, the effort you're doing. And then there's now a very interesting concept of using AI to create synthetic feedback. So instead of going out there and actually doing a very in-depth, expensive and time-consuming study on what do you think people would like or dislike about this new service, you can have AI generate that response in, it takes you maybe 20 minutes to half an hour to set things up. There is time that you have to put into it, but then you get it back almost instantly and you can keep doing it. And that is a step change in cost reduction and speed to understanding them before.
It also sounds like a great way to make sure we're checking ourselves, especially when we're working cross-border or around the world with people who we should be consulting in some fashion, and maybe that gets us a step closer to understanding their needs than we did before.
So it's a great thought partner where I like to use it to say, here's my argument, poke holes in it. And it will come back with, here's 15 ways that you have not thought about it, and you should be thinking about it. And if you gave it to anybody else, they would poke holes in it so fast that it would embarrass you. So go back and write it again. And I love that part because, it's great to have a impartial, annoying thought partner who will not blab to their friends about how stupid your original ideas are.
Well, I know there are a lot of thought partners out there who would love to at least explore the ideas that you're issuing out every day. How can people follow your posts, but also just your work? How would you like them to be in touch, if at all, or at least to keep track of what you're sharing?
Sure. There are 3 ways to really follow the thought leadership that I hope I espouse. First, of course, if you look me up on LinkedIn, Wayan Vota. I'm a unique Google hit, so it's not hard to find a lot about me. And so on LinkedIn is a great place. I also write a blog. It is the blog of record for the digital development community, 25,000 subscribers, ICT Works. ICTWORKS.org. So ICT Works, really amazing. When I first started it in 2007, I was writing a majority of the posts. Now I write about a third, and we have a strong community of people giving ideas about how we can use technology to improve people's lives around the world. And then last but not least, just email me if you really want to reach out. I'm pretty easy to find, wayan@wayan.com. So Wayan at wayan.com. I've owned wayan.com for many, many, many years.
Another great early digital decision. Thank you so much for all of this, Wayan. Really do appreciate it. Our thanks again to both of the guests today, and we hope that their comments and their insights are helpful to you in your journeys. Coming up next on the Philanthropy Mastermind series, first of all, if you missed it, last Friday on the PM podcast, we released a powerful new conversation with Christy Coleman, Executive Director of the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, and one of the most courageous and influential voices in public history today. Her work, from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation to Detroit's Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History to the American Civil War Museum, has helped to reshape how America tells its story. This conversation between us is more than about just museums. It's about power, narrative, identity, truth, and leadership. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to listen, or of course at DonorSearch.net. Looking ahead, this week's How to Raise show is shifting to Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern as the Philanthropy Mastermind series hits the road. This episode, carried live from the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy Conference in Aurora, Colorado, will be called From Policy to Possibility: How Philanthropy and Innovation Fuel Healthcare's Future. I'll be joined by Alice Ayers, President and CEO of AHP, Betsy Chapin-Taylor, CEO of Accordant, and Sarah Tedesco, Chief Operating Officer of DonorSearch at Evertrue. We'll be examining how policy shifts, economic pressures, and AI-driven insights are reshaping healthcare fundraising, and what leaders can do to navigate change and drive meaningful impact. And of course, right here on this show, Frontlines of Social Good, will be back next Tuesday at this time with the latest news and voices shaping the philanthropic landscape. Make sure to check out all of our past episodes of our 3 programs on the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch, at donorsearch.net. I'm Jay Frost. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care and do good.